some headlines regarding like graduates struggling to find jobs. I don't think there's, of course, not a Singaporean issue. It's definitely a global issue.
Yeah.
The number of people I've met, most of them are like, investment managers, fund managers these days. Some of them were so blunt. They were like, some of these Gen Zers, they're so dumb, they just take stuff on ChatGPT and they think like that is the truth. That's not how you use ChatGPT. You're meant to query it. And you think about, and one of them even said like, the way that AI is advancing, I'm just not going to hire a fresh grad anymore. I'm just going to get somebody, I don't know, a few years experience and just build the team from then. The way things are moving as well is, I think organizations and funds and all that are just going to be finding ways to do more with less. So teams are probably going to be much smaller than they were before. Everyone's figuring that out, right? Then what's going to mean for the next generation of kids who are just coming out of school?
Welcome to Brave. Learn from Southeast Asia's best tech leaders. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. No BS on success. I'm Jeremy Au, venture capitalist, serial founder, Harvard MBA, science fiction nerd, and dad of 2 daughters. Every week, we debate startup news, interview changemakers, answer listener questions, and share personal insights. Join our movement of over 40,000 members and get transcripts, resources, and community at www.bravesea.com. Stay well and stay brave. Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Oh, welcome back to Singapore from the Middle East. I mean, I was going to say, like, how's the weather? People complain about Singapore's weather and Southeast Asia.
No, it's not even a fair comparison.
Really? I mean, Singapore is hot and humid. I was there, but to be fair, we went there during the winter time.
Which is nice.
She was so charming, all walking around with a light sweater.
Winter's the best time to be there.
So I can totally imagine this.
No, really. Like after, I always tell people, like once it crosses 40 degrees, like it's not even possible to be outside.
Yeah.
You can't even walk. You just stay indoors. Yeah. So all of the activities move indoors into like malls. So like I think even the Straits Times covered this also. I think there's like a marathon that's being organized inside a mall. So it's not even possible to be outside. You
know what? I would be fine for an indoor marathon. Sounds so much fun. They can pause, get yourself a Starbucks.
Well, then you're not very serious about the marathon. You're just taking a break.
And then around, get some donuts.
Yeah. Going to the ski section if you want to.
Cool off, then around and get massage. You're going around and you finish off some fruit and ice cream. So so what was it like? So, it's been a year in the Middle East and, how do you feel like Southeast Asia has changed, with your new eyes?
It's interesting. I mean, I think earlier on we were talking about how I was just in CBD today. It was the first day I was in CBD for nearly a year, and I can definitely, this is how I feel. I don't know if the rest of Southeast Asia feels the same way, but it definitely feels like the mood has been a bit dampened. It's like someone took a wet blanket and put it all over like the CBD area, like the Raffles Place area where there's a giant square and everything. Yeah, things feel kind of dampened, like the mood is dampened. And I mean, I was still following the headlines even when I was in the Middle East, right? Southeast Asian headlines. And it's funny how like 1 year on, it's just been, we're writing about the same stuff. It's the same corporate scandals, but now it's, kind of like taken a step further. We're still talking about it. I guess there's some form of justice for some cases, not for all, but yeah, more of it, if anything. And the question marks are still kind of hanging over everybody's heads in a way. So very colorful stories out of Southeast Asia versus say like Middle East. I still feel the mood is still kind of positive. I mean, not to say that the money is flowing the same way that it was before. And I mean, slightly different situation that's happening there, right? I think the ecosystem in the Middle East is still very much funded by sovereign wealth funds. And you're talking like the PIFs, like PIF from Saudi Arabia to ADIA to Mubadalas and all these guys. Most of their revenues is coming from oil and gas. So if you've noticed also the oil prices have also slipped. So when oil prices go down, obviously they're not in a position to be able to spend on these luxury projects or pick-up projects, whether it's Neo or Motherline or whatever. The money is still flowing, but it's not going to be flowing the same way as it did before. So if you're a fund manager that's fundraising there's also a bit of a question mark, like, will I still be able to raise money? And then I think when you talk to Middle East fund managers also, it's a bit of a different story. I mean, first of all, I think it's a more nascent ecosystem compared to, say, some of the rest of the world. The sovereign wealth funds putting money into the local ecosystem is very different from sovereign wealth funds having the pocket of money to put money elsewhere. So you're kind of competing against the rest of the world in some sense. And there's more competition. So there's a bit of a question mark even for some of these local like VCs as well about whether or not they'll be able to raise money. So, but comparatively, in terms of like just pure mood wise, yeah, I do think Southeast Asia does feel more like more of a dampened kind of mood because, here there's not, we've also come off the highs of 2020, 2021, which, for me personally, on hindsight, is kind of interesting. I'm beginning to ask myself, like, I mean, when I journeyed through the whole ecosystem, growing with the ecosystem, that was my normal, but maybe that wasn't really normal at all. If you think about it, right?
Yeah.
And then now when you come into this side of the market, this side of the cycle, I'm wondering, like, is this actually the normal? Which is an interesting thought. I guess, markets have ups and they have downs. And there's definitely a bit of a reality check that's kind of like set into Southeast Asia now. Whereas in the Middle East, things are still in the boom,
Yeah.
things it's still at a very, very early stage, I would say. But in terms of mood, going back to the original question, right? The positivity is still there. And it's still kind of driving a lot of that optimism on the ground. People are kind of, I guess, willing to take a bet on some more audacious kind of projects. They recently did something on this like real estate tokenization, which in Southeast Asia, you don't see a lot of like crypto. Well, I guess now the Genius Act and all that, there's a bit of that restarting of conversations about stable coins and all that kind of stuff. Dubai has really been kind of going on about that for a long time now. And the relationship between crypto and Asia has been a bit more like forward, backward. So yeah, it's interesting to see that evolution on both sides. So it's all evolving at different paces and different times. So long answer to your question, but yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because definitely I would say that Southeast Asia is dampened. I mean, the mental fact is that the US Trump administration with the tariff structure, I mean, it's a tax on both producers and consumers, right? So structurally, even Singapore that has, a trade surplus, right? Dynamic with the US where Singapore buys more things from America than it sells to America. Even Singapore got 10% tariff, and Vietnam obviously is, 20 to 30% across the region. So I think there's a little bit of that, reconfiguration where I think people are still digesting that news. Whereas a year ago, it was just the whole high interest rates, but it felt like the expectation was that Biden would be the status quo. And then with Trump, I think nobody was really expecting the tariff kind of that situation to be extended on a global basis. Because I think previously in his last administration,
Really?
it was his last administration.
He's always kind of like talked about this tariff thing.
I think we agree. I think we all can read the news today. A year ago, it wasn't obvious to the man on the street or to most people that because I think there's always a dynamic where historically, like everybody understood that electioneering campaigning always is that dynamic of, domestic voters vote, right? Doesn't matter what the international audience is. So, to some extent, you still can remember the time when it's like, George Bush versus John Kerry, right? Or, like there's a lot of people, things that are being said, but after the campaigns are done, then the world keeps going. So I think there's this dynamic where everybody's economies are being dynamically rewritten and it's starting to impact and trickle down to everybody. So Singapore, obviously, for this quarter, announced a little bit higher growth, but they think a recession, slower growth is coming. So all the signposts are there saying, watch out.
And I mean, on top of that, also, like, I think there were also some headlines regarding like graduates struggling to find jobs. I don't think there's, of course, not a Singaporean issue. It's definitely a global issue.
Yeah.
The number of people I've met, most of them are like investment managers, fund managers, these guys. Had conversations where people are like, some of you and I'm sorry if your viewers, some of them are Gen Zers, but some of them were so blunt. They were like, some of these Gen Zers, they're so dumb, they just take stuff on ChatGPT and they think like that is the truth. That's not how you use ChatGPT. You're meant to query it, and and you think about, and one of them even said like, the way that AI is advancing, I'm just not going to hire a fresh grad anymore. I'm just going to get somebody, I don't know, a few years experience and just build the team from then. The way things are moving as well is, I think organizations and funds and all that are just going to be finding ways to do more with less. So teams are probably going to be much smaller than they were before. Everyone's figuring that out, right? Then what's going to mean for the next generation of kids who are just coming out of school? I don't know. I mean, I guess the positive side to that could be that, this could be the most entrepreneurial generation of kids that we will ever see. You never know, right? This is an opportunity for them too. But yeah, I really don't know. And I don't envy them at all. It's quite a scary time, that we're in. Every time there's a new update on AI, everything's getting rewritten again and again. Yeah, I think the next few years are going to be so different.
Yeah.
Even from next year when we have this conversation, it's going to be things are going to be very dramatically different again. Yeah, I don't envy this generation of kids. Yeah. I mean, you have kids, so I'm sure when you look at your kids, you're like...
I think for them, they're Generation Alpha, right? Because
Yeah.
they're 5 years old and 3 years old this year.
This
So
is the
they have
generation-
plenty of time for
Yeah.
AI, and then we'll just watch it happen. I think for the Gen Z people, it's like they just got hit by a truck.
Yeah.
By both the pandemic, which forced a lot of them to not really enjoy socialization. So they didn't get to do their internships in person. They didn't get to do classes in person. So I remember my old UC Berkeley professor, I was just talking to him and he said like, hey, for the kids who had to do remote learning, and he was teaching them in university after that, it felt like they were just not socialized. Like they didn't know how to pay attention. They didn't know, the basic norms, right? And because, they were stuck at home and behaviors that would be weird. Like simple one would be like in a meeting, there's 5 of us, we should all pay attention to each other. And 80% of the time we're talking to each other and 20% of the time we're on our computers taking notes. You shouldn't be the other way around where you're like 80% multitasking like crazy on a computer and only looking up 20% of the time when somebody is asking you a question. It comes across as rude or disconnected or Gen Z stare, whatever you want to call it. But, then, that's where some of these things where it's just like, okay, it's like, nobody showed them or modeled for them what good meeting norms should be like, right? And like us millennials, only the middle managers now, right? And then the above us, right? We can call it boomers or Gen X or whatever you want to call it. Those are the ones who are like the ones who are really making promotions or making decisions, and they're observing people. So,
it's going to change again, but there's a whole different set of problems when it comes to like hiring and like Gen Z and stuff. I mean, even like when it comes to, it's funny, I just had a dinner conversation with a couple of friends yesterday, and the differences between like dating a Gen Z versus dating a millennial.
I'm all in.
Because you've been out of the dating scene for
forever. I had the OkCupid because I had the personality quizzes. I don't remember that. And so it's always fun to do those quizzes.
But you didn't do the swiping thing.
No, I didn't do the swiping thing. But I always remember that there was this person who we were like each other's 99% match by OkCupid. But I felt it was so weird because she reached out to me and she was like, hey, we should meet up. And I was like, oh, this is too socially awkward for me to actually meet somebody, over the internet.
Well,
I never met her.
That's a norm now.
Yeah, so that's a total norm. So I'm just saying, like, back then, it was like, oh man, I'm such a weirdo for even considering meeting this woman. But technically, it's great, lawyer, photos out, 89% on personality.
According to the algorithm.
It wasn't that sophisticated back then. Back then, it was like,
true.
Do you smoke? Yes, no. Are you okay with your partner smoking? Yes, no.
So, this is also kind of my theory, right? Like sometimes when you rely too much on these dating apps, of course, the algorithm will make logical recommendation based on your personality traits and whatever. But sometimes you may also miss out on, there will always be outlier incidents or outlier people or outlier companies when you're doing investing that you may not necessarily bet on, but maybe this is the best bet that, that you will make, right? If you don't give yourself a chance to explore it, then how do you know that this might not be the best investment you'll ever make? In a sense, right? So I think like
comparing dating and investment.
Sorry, my mind works in different ways. But it's true, isn't it? Like,
the difference is that investment deals, you're supposed to make a portfolio of 20 investments.
Okay, yes. You see, you also need to you need to exercise judgment, right? Like if everything is a mathematical process, then I mean, I guess it could work for some, but I don't know, you do need to exercise some personal judgment too. Like you need to be self-aware, you need to be, I don't know how I ended up talking about this, but okay, it is true, isn't it?
But yeah, I think it's interesting to talk about obviously dating and everything, but I think circling back, I love that phrase that you had is like, it felt like you and I grew up at a time and obviously did our work in technology at a time when, it was only going up. And so it was quiet, the ecosystem was going up and then it was growing super hot. And then now it's like out and everyone's like, oh, it's going to come back up. And now everyone's like, okay, it's not coming back up. And some people are saying like, it's never going to come back up
No,
ever again.
no, I don't think it's a cycle, right? I
Yeah.
mean, at least that's what I believe. Historically, there are ups and there are downs. It can't be just like up forever and down forever. So
Yeah, the cycle could be 20-year cycles, right?
damn,
It could be, like
that's really pessimistic.
I'm just saying I could agree with you there's a cycle, but it just takes a long time for it
Yeah.
to come back up, right?
Yeah. How long is your x-axis or your y-axis? Like,
Yeah. In our lifetimes,
Yeah.
we will see another boom. One
Hopefully.
time,
No.
2 times. I
I'm
don't know.
not an expert, but yeah, we're definitely on the other side of the bell curve now. So you gotta wait. Yes.
It's like those people who say it's like it can't get worse, and then they touch wood. Hopefully they don't jinx it, right?
Yeah. And I guess, I mean, if you go by the all these investment logics, then the downside is always when the market's in the down, it's also kind of the opportunity, the time where you should be taking, I guess, opportunities. I'm clearly optimist, as you can see, but it's true. I mean, I guess there's just a lot of stuff maybe that's coloring the investment landscape and all these things that are hogging the headlines in Southeast Asia now. So yeah, you're in a better position to be able to tell because you've been here, but that has been my takeaway of seeing it, and feeling the slight jadedness of this region.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting also because, by the way, hearing your discussion about the comparison, I thought it was interesting because, I think without you saying it, I would have thought that, yeah, obviously tariffs have caused Southeast Asian economies to have to think seriously about restructuring because of all the pain that's going to happen, but also the knowledge that it may not get better for a long time. So there's going to be a lot of transitional pain as economies restructure. It's just that I would have thought that you said the Middle East would have been chugging along because everybody still needs oil. That being said, I think what's interesting is that it's a fair point that oil prices are lower. And actually, oil prices are lower because of these tariffs as well, right? Because tariffs are depressing global economic activity because people don't know whether they should invest in what to build and where. And also consumers don't feel comfortable buying because of the taxes, etc. Actually, there's a little bit of, I thought they were totally disconnected, but actually there's a little bit of an ecosystem dynamic where tariffs are also impacting both Southeast Asia and the Middle East in terms of depressing the economic models of these countries and regions.
No, yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, I'm not an expert in oil prices, but like oil prices are also kind of determined by OPEC. So it's just a group of them that actually do determine the demand and supply. So anytime that Saudi Arabia wants to shift oil prices, you just turn the tap on or you turn the tap off. To them, most of the oil still comes from that region. So, I mean, of course, there's a lot of other geopolitics in play, which I'm definitely not I'm not an expert in that field. But I mean, yeah, the oil prices are kind of where it is. And I mean, this whole narrative, I think we all kind of know the Middle East being kind of still very much dependent on oil and gas. There's a huge push to diversify their economies. That's why they've made so much investments into tech and entrepreneurship and all that. A lot of that still, like the logic of that is still very much intact, and there's still a desire to do it. It's just that when you compare it to Southeast Asia, they're still much earlier in that cycle. And it will take definitely some time for them to get there. But yeah, I mean, it has its own complexities, I would say. I mean, on top of it, also the geopolitics. And I think we've seen a lot of conflicts also. I mean, conflicts have always existed in the Middle East, like all through the years. It's such a long time, hundreds of years of conflict. Right? So that also kind of colors into the stuff that's been happening there. But I think, yeah, if you look at what UAE is trying to do, they've also borrowed a lot of the Singapore playbook in a lot of ways, trying to position itself as hub of talent, capital hub. Historically, they also positioned themselves as a logistics hub. They borrowed the Singapore Airlines model. They replicated for Emirates. They've been very successful with that. And I think we're in the early stages of seeing also a lot of these like fund managers from the US also is starting to open up offices in the Middle East. They do tend to, and this is my personal point of view, yeah, they do tend to believe a lot of the hype. I don't want to say that it's not good. It is good, but I think there's definitely still some way to go, because when you see all these headlines like, oh, Brookfield and, really big fund managers in the US opening offices there, the expectation is that they're going to deploy. But the truth is the market there is actually very small and still limited. And I don't think even on an entrepreneurial talent level, they've reached the level that like where Southeast Asia or India is at. So it's going to take some time for that talent pool. Like when I talk to founders in the Middle East, when it comes to hiring, they usually end up bringing people in, or they outsource their teams to places like, it could be Egypt, it could be Jordan, it could be Russia, it could be Ukraine, it could be India, Pakistan, which is also very diverse if you think about it, right? And that's kind of the uniqueness also of the Middle East. It's literally in the middle of 3 different continents, but it's going to take some time. They've not seen the corrections and the cycles. I would say the entrepreneurial talent there, they've seen maybe like some second generation entrepreneurs, whereas in Singapore, you're starting to see like 3, 4 already, some of them. Plus, on top of that, some of them have had real crises, like the corrections that we've been. So there needs to be a bit of that recycling that needs to happen. But yeah, it's going to take a bit of time. Yeah.
So when you think about comparing, I think, Southeast Asia tech ecosystem versus the US versus the Middle East, how do you think about it? What do you think is a fair comparison? What do you think is unfair comparison? How do you think about it?
I mean, obviously, I don't think any of us should be comparing ourselves to US. I think only US and China deserve to be compared to each other, and we see that rivalry kind of take place. But emerging markets are very different from, Silicon Valley and some of these real tech and talent hubs. And yeah, within even the emerging market landscape, I think it's worth doing more comparisons across global emerging markets. So like what they like to call the global South. Middle East, Africa, Southeast Asia, LATAM. There are more interesting comparisons and actually more interesting parallels across these ecosystems. And we've seen a couple of fund managers, like I think Saison Capital has been spending a lot more time in LATAM recently. They've been doing a lot of stuff with the funds there. They've even been deploying into Brazil, Mexico. Yeah, there are more of these interesting learnings and lessons that we can borrow off different ecosystems. And moving forward, at least personally, that's what I'm trying to explore and learn more about, because I think eventually investors and operators will start thinking more that way. It will be very unfair for us to try to say that, oh, I'm going to be the next Silicon Valley.
I guess, what's the future, right, do you think? I mean, right now we're dealing with Southeast Asia, we're dealing with all of the, I guess the cleanup, right? Right now, I think recently we had the kind of like arrest of the eFishery founders and some of the management team. I think this stuff happening. I mean, how do you think about when you look at that span for Southeast Asia?
I really hope that in Indonesia particularly, so we've got eFishery, Investry, and Tiny Hub. These 3 recent in the last month has been taking turns to occupy the headlines. I really hope that we will be able to bring some of these matters, that there will be justice, there will be stuff. I think definitely you do sense, I'm sure you speak to a couple of Indonesians as well. I think the frustration and the anger is definitely very real, both from the investors as well as from the founders and the ecosystem, because it impacts everybody. And I think if we don't find a way to that some of the people who have done these misdoings are either put in jail or whatever, that there's some penalty or something. Yeah, if we let some of these go, it will be an issue, because we are indirectly sending a signal that you can raise money, a lot of money, commit fraud, and get away with it. And I don't think that's kind of the right signal that we want to send. Already, it's coloring the perception of a lot of global LPs and institutional investors. And if our corporate justice system can't even live up to that, then we would have failed on our own integrity, because we saw the vision, right?
Did you ever write an eFishery article about how good they were? You were at District Asia. I mean, and all the unicorns.
I only wrote about eFishery after the whole thing kind of fell apart. I mean, I've written in various companies that were on the rise and companies that were, on a decline. I guess some different cases are bubbling up, but I think the justice aspect moving forward, and I do hope like this comes to pass. Like, okay, you talk about, say, the Investry guy who ran away to Doha.
Yeah, do you see him?
No, I don't know.
You're just gonna follow him with your little, camera, your little sunglasses, like spy movie. Of a car, take a few.
That's not exactly how we do things.
Investigative journalism in Hollywood is always so glam, right?
It's Hollywood. That's all I can say. I do hunch over the laptop. Yeah, very unglam way. Usually in pajamas, like no makeup on. You're like, yeah. That's how it is. That part is real. The rest of it, no. Yeah, he's in Doha, and I don't know if the government is going to be able to extract him. It will be interesting to see if they can extract him.
Shouldn't they be able to? I mean, Doha, Indonesia feels like it'd be I don't see why would the Doha folks want to protect him.
So that's kind of like the big question, right? Who exactly is the person who's shooting this guy? Why is it that they're choosing? Why is JTA Holdings? Doesn't seem to be a lot of clarity. I've asked around clearly, but nobody seems to really know where the source of funding is
Yeah.
from. It looks like a conglomerate that might be family backed or something.
Yeah.
But if you were JTA and you saw these like headlines, why would you choose to keep this a wanted man from Indonesia, an employee in your company?
Yeah. Good question. If
Why
you know
would
the
you do
answer, leave a
I-
comment or message her.
you don't have to tell us in the comments, no.
Leave a comment below.
Are you judging me? Yeah, no, but honestly, it's
Yeah.
either you don't know, you really don't read the news at all, or you don't care, right?
Maybe nobody
Yeah.
asked you. Maybe Indonesia did not ask for this guy back.
I don't think so. And I think Qatar does. I think
Yeah.
there is an Indonesian embassy.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Okay, so we should create like a Substack list, like the
All the
7
one-
unexplained
all the-
mysteries.
The wanted people who go to the Middle East. which I
Oh,
think
that
there
would be that is a clickbait article. The 7 most wanted people of Southeast Asia tax. The 7 fugitives. That's so
Yeah.
depressing.
And that's another, so I get people asking me like, oh, Middle East sounds like you meet a lot of really interesting people. I'm like, I do. Yes, there's a lot of questionable money there too.
No, I think what's interesting, of course, is obviously I think we're starting to see the wheels of justice turn. I mean, 6 months ago, all of us were asking like, hey, is anybody make a move on eFishery? Especially after I think the founder literally declared that he did it.
On Bloomberg, of all places.
Of all places. I was like, guys, dude, who's your lawyer, buddy?
What was the sentiment like, actually?
I think the lawyers were like, I can't believe he admitted all this because him saying this because the VCs made me do it is not a good reason. You admit that you did it, and the law doesn't really take into account of the why, because the why is also pretty weak rationale. So I think everybody felt lawyers felt a poor legal defense.
Did he have a lawyer though?
Maybe not. I mean, clearly he didn't have legal counsel going into the fraud.
Yeah.
He didn't have legal counsel during the fraud. And it looks like he probably didn't have good legal counsel dealing with the ramifications of this fraud. So I don't know what the guy's thinking, but I think let's put his one side on the lawyer side.
Yeah.
I think from the sense of like the different crowds would be like VCs and founders, I think would be the easiest way. And for a lot of VCs, it's just very disappointing to see that because most VCs, and actually a lot of our founders actually were hoping that they were mistaken.
Even at that point?
Oh, I mean,
by the time that came out, I was already kind of...
Yeah, but still, not everybody's clued in. Not everybody has read the internal audit reports. Not everybody understands what's going on. A little bit like, this was the final nail in the coffin to be like, okay, this guy is really...
Like no saving.
No, there's no saving grace. There's no out. And also, anyway, so I think, and there was actually a lot of founders who were quite impressed by him or respected him or were inspired by him. And then when the news first came out, there was a lot of like folks who defended him because they felt like, it's like a VC takeover. Yeah, I mean, like willing founder and, trumped up charges. And so I think once it came out that he actually did do it, and then everybody read it, everyone's kind of like, gosh. So it's kind of like depressing for quite a few folks. I think now there's some justice coming in, I think I'm going to feel, a bit better about it maybe to some extent. But I think the time period where the article came out and there seemed to be like no action from by the authorities. Yeah. And the longer it went on, it just made it feel worse and worse to the point where it was like, well, this is, like you said, confidence inspiring for any LP. It's not confidence inspiring to any
even
VC.
GP.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you're a VC, you're like, wait, if I do due diligence and these guys did sophisticated fraud and were like lying to me up front, you know what I mean? Everybody's going to freeze up and say, hey, maybe I can't do due diligence in Indonesia and I can't trust any numbers coming from Indonesia, right? So I think now that there's some justice turning, hopefully that cleans up the ecosystem a bit.
Yeah, that is the predicament that we are in.
Yeah. I do know of one for sure fraud case in Indonesia that hasn't broken yet. But that one I fully understood 100% happened. So we'll just see how it happens. Okay. And I think there's another one that's an alleged case. There's one that's in the Philippines.
Oh, okay.
Because it's alleged. Whistleblower, but we don't know whether it's corroborated or not, right? So I think, to some extent, I don't think all the shoes, what they say, like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. I think there's a few more cases that will drop.
Actually, I've been away for the past year. I've been very, very surprised at the number of people who have reached out to me to investigate. And I left DSA and I thought, no one's gonna, because I'm not part of DSA to expose all these things anymore. And I moved all the way to like Dubai and people were still like reaching out to me. And, I have on and off, whenever time permit, I would actually follow up on some of them. Yeah, I was very, very surprised that people were still reaching out. And I definitely shows that there's a lot more that we don't know. And there's stuff that's still kind of bubbling. I guess various sizes. I guess only, the eFishery one is very big, right? The rest are maybe like different sizes. But I mean, it's a good thing, I think, that some of this is coming to the light. I don't think, I know it's very depressing for everybody, but it's good that it comes up, because like even when I contrast it to the Middle East, like the media scene there is not as active as it is here. People tend to believe a lot of things that they read. There isn't really a sense of questioning some of these things. Of course, there's, the real ones who will be like, wait, I know this is BS. But the environment there hasn't gotten to a stage where, the tech in Asia, the DSAs, are actually coming up with all this, really exposing some of this stuff. Eventually, I'm sure it will. But yeah, it's just you're going through the pains, I guess, the growth pains.
Yeah. You wrote one article actually about Vietnam that I read. So you clearly still have time to write about Southeast Asia. Could you share a little bit more about the Vietnamese?
I still cover something Southeast Asia. So this company called Alterno, I think they made the headlines because one of their co-founders, former CEO, who was also a co-founder, started blogging. Started with a very harmless blog about his sand battery technology, which is the technology that Alterno he built. And then as one blog post led to another blog post to another blog post, you begin to sense that, okay, there seems to be some agenda here, and the agenda is to get his version of a story out. Slowly you realize, he began alleging that he was pushed out by his co-founders, that the investors apparently was part of it. And I guess there's a very strong sense of injustice. So I think DSA was the first one that picked up, put a quick story, and then they did the piece. And then I was following up. I happened to be in Istanbul on a time. I was like, this is really interesting. We should definitely follow this thing. It took me a long time to actually get him to speak to me. I was very happy that he actually trusted me because, there are a lot of reasons why co-founders fall apart too. I don't know if you've seen your share, but there were 3 of them. And they were brought together actually by Antler. So there's actually also another big question about how successful some of these co-founder programs. Not all of these co-founders necessarily lead to a successful marriage. In this particular case, it turned out to be quite a bad one. But I think there's a separate story. He was alleging a lot of these different things, and I managed to get him to speak to me, even though he was quite paranoid. I just kind of get that side of the story. I think there are some legal cases that are still ongoing now, both in Vietnam, and I think he wants to do something in Singapore. And unfortunately, at least optically, it looks like the investors have just kind of disappeared, which is also sad because, you would hope that maybe the investors would do something about it or at least step in. But I don't know, this is my point of view. I think it's just not a big company, it's a small company, in the sense that they haven't raised a lot of money. I think mostly safe notes and convertibles. But the difference with this company is they actually had IP. They had IP that was in the US. Slightly unique in a sense. And they also raised from a couple of institutional investors as like ADB Ventures, Stone, which not that common. It's not that common in Vietnam, So for it to fall apart like this is actually it's a waste of people's money, of everything, And it's sad because you would hope that something could be built out of this, but now it's turned into a whole legal case.
I think it's interesting because this story is also bad news, but it's not really huge bad news because in the sense that, like you said, this company is effectively a C-stage company. It's young. Co-founder conflict is very common. You can watch the movie The Social Network of Mark Zuckerberg breaking up with Eduardo Severin. Then they also had the whole falling out, lawsuit, and settlement. And then it became Facebook, which is now Meta. So I think co-founder conflict is, I'm just saying, like, in terms of the news landscape, I think there's one bucket which is I call like fraud, which I think deserves to be brought to justice and clearly articulate like I said, let the wheels of justice turn and, put out commensurate punishment or, proclaim innocence for the right folks, right? And so, there's this chunk, and then this other chunk that you just mentioned is what I call like business as usual startups. It's like 95% of startups fail. Co-founder
one of the reasons.
It's like you run out of money, your co-founder fails, all of the above. They're highly correlated. It's like divorce, right? It's like, why did you break up? It's like all of the reasons, right? So to me, like, I just think this is the ecosystem just has to hear the story, people mature and people learn from it, and they're just like, okay, I better have a higher bar for my co-founder. I better have a proper co-founder agreement. I don't feel too bad about, at least based on what you have told me. Obviously, I don't know the situation I kept here about. But if you're telling me supposedly that these investors are safe notes, they technically don't have control or board seats.
From what I
significant,
know,
right?
observer boards.
Yeah,
So
exactly. So they don't
yeah.
have the ability to mediate
Yeah.
or be able to really
I mean,
do
they're not
anything. Yeah.
incentivized to kind of stick their neck out too, because these are safe notes. It's not as
Yeah.
if they had put in like, I don't know, a few
Yeah.
million into this thing. And then
Yeah.
you really have to kind of save the portfolio in a sense. So, I mean, it's sad for the founders and sad for the company, I guess. They have hired people and
Yeah.
this could have been something, but it's not. So
Yeah.
what do you do? I mean,
Write a
I'm
good
sure this is,
co-founding agreement beforehand. No.
yeah,
Try to separate nicely and figure out some amicable agreement.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
I think those are like not necessarily laws, but these are just
Hmm.
norms that ecosystem has to learn.
And maybe
Yeah.
experience too, perhaps
Yeah.
to a certain extent.
If all of the founders more experienced have been serial founders, they might have had a more upfront conversation earlier.
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah. And settle in a way that everybody gets something of something rather than everybody gets nothing out of nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what's happening.
Yeah, it's worse than nothing out of nothing because now they sue each other and it's probably like
Yeah.
a massive time
And then,
suck.
yeah,
And
then
there's
now,
some law
everything's all in the public sphere, so it becomes this ugly.
thing. Is every time you Google your name, you're like, it's going to be
Exactly.
there as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's not easy for sure. So I guess, do you have any advice for folks? I don't know, like moral of the story.
Moral of the story. Getting moral advice on like companies. Well, no, I can't give any moral advice or any advice to companies. I mean, yeah, the market is still where it is. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the next 6 to 12 months, I guess. I think you earlier mentioned that everyone's kind of hoping that next year will be a slightly better year. I don't know how much of it is people just being hopeful, because I feel like that was said last year. On a personal basis, I mean, especially in the last 2 to 3 years in Southeast Asia, it's taken a longer time than I expected for things to really turn around. Definitely from the time that the markets corrected, I thought, oh, okay, maybe we'll see some secondary activity. You'll see some interesting distressed deals,
Right.
But it took a really long time, like really, really long time. Yeah, so I mean, what do you do? You just got to figure new opportunities for yourself. I mean, yeah, I really don't know. I don't know if you do investments even recently, or if you looked at any interesting deals. Have you seen any interesting deal flow?
Yeah, I think we're looking at some, kind of interesting deals because I'm more of the angel side, right? Because I help lead the Harvard, Angels Club in Southeast Asia. And I think for me, I have 5 major categories of startups now. Some are old, some are newer in flavor, but I'll say the 5. Like one is, of course, is your classic regional player. So this would be a Grab. And also, these regional players also tend to be what I call in the white spaces. What I mean by that is they tend to be about the things that connect countries rather within country.
Okay.
So for example, travel, logistic, tourism, because these are things that are not, single country thing, but, people are traveling. And so, if you're in America, you just call it, oh, I'm in a tourism space, not tourism. I'm in the, I don't know, I don't know, was it shipping for America, right? But in Asia, shipping is the distance between Boston to New York is the distance between Singapore, Malaysia, right? KL, right? So these are different countries. So I think there's a regional part where it's about some sort of a regional connective tissue component. I think the second, of course, is your single country, multiple business arms. So this is your local conglomerate approach or super app. So this would be your Vietnamese agricultural company doing, first let's do durians, then let's do rice, then let's do, like building out from their perspective, 10 businesses, each doing about $10 million of revenue each, and kind of like rolling it up to about $100 million of revenue by the same geography, kind of like dynamics. So it's number 2. I think number 3, from my perspective, is what I call like kind of like rising middle class in Southeast Asia. So this might be like, let's set up a beef rice bowl business in Indonesia. There's halal, it's a rising middle class, F&B, consumer goods. I guess Evo would be a good example in Singapore doing, kind of like consumer goods for the rising middle class. I think the 4th is what I call like your end market, but some sort of level Southeast Asia exposure. To some extent, reminds me of like, castlery. We even made an argument for like Omni Table and Prism Plus, kind of like Singapore, some level of like maybe OEM in China, of like suppliers, Singapore marketing and global market kind of dynamic. The last, of course, is your pure tech. Some sort of like we're doing global software as a service, we're doing biotech in the US, but some sort of like we're doing crypto, but some sort of like more virtualized global place where place doesn't matter. as much to some extent.
Okay.
So those seem to be the 5 different flavors, and I feel like the first 2 I mentioned were the known, I would say known playbooks in the past bull market. But I feel like the remaining 3 are becoming much more popular now, which is your, again, like private equity, growth, kopi kenangan type play. I'm just saying I'm trying to be like the kopi kenangan for beef rice bowls, kopi kenangan for instant noodles. Chuggy is one. You see a lot of the hot pot places that have done well, right, in Southeast Asia as well. I think a lot of people are just replicating that playbook.
So, I mean, again, I haven't really seen, but that was what I was told, like they're seeing more. Their presence is more felt in Southeast Asia over the past year. So I was like, okay, interesting. I think the 2 of them are also looking to do a Hong Kong IPO. I think it's also worth investigating. I haven't done it myself, but on TikTok Shop and some of these like shops, the number of Chinese players who are actually setting up these shops, because I was told that a lot of them are actually pretty big if you actually look into the numbers. Again, this is just what I heard, and I'm not surprised, to be very honest.
I think you'll see a lot more brands actually. The big trend, I think, is if you look at Singapore, for example, BYD is now the top selling car brand in Singapore, right? They leapfrog the internal combustion because it used to be Toyota and all these folks, and now they leapfrog the electric, but then also they compete on price, right? And if you think about these consumer Chinese brands, they also understand TikTok. So they understand how to do the marketing. They also have the logistics chains like J&T. They also have the diaspora. So, and they don't have any issue with the capital flows. Building a business outside China also is diversification from the headquarters perspective in case there's some sort of like, US-China trade or broader conflict that's going to happen. To some extent, all these HQs are like, okay, I'm willing to invest money to expand to Southeast Asia and not be trying to be profitable early, because as long as it maintains value, grows market share and grows top line revenue, and even though we're losing money on an EBITDA basis, it's valuable for my Hong Kong Stock Exchange IPO. It's good to diversify my revenue base, and it gives me some optionality in terms of geopolitics because my headquarters can move around. So it's interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, even in the Middle East, you're seeing a couple of these Chinese players. Kita, who's like a food delivery player, there's backed by Meituan. They've been super aggressive, not just in the Middle East, but also like Brazil. So you definitely see them doing this global emerging market play, right? The Chinese, and they've done this. They're very experienced. They're probably the most experienced in doing this. And now being able to kind of operate at scale, you do see them. They have some pretty ambitious plans to expand. So I think Kita now they were in Saudi. They have plans to get into like Kuwait, Egypt, and UAE as well. And then, of course, Brazil and I think Mexico. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch.
I'm wondering about this hypothesis that I heard while I was in holiday in the Middle East. But what I was talking to this local business person, but I was saying was that his perspective is that he thinks that Middle East and China is kind of like hand in hand a great strategic fit for each other. Because what you're saying was that I think for the Middle East, they have very cheap energy domestically. Historically, they exported it out of research travel, but they never really burnt all that oil themselves. That's one. 2, obviously, they are quite comfortable having a migrant worker population historically from South Asia. In other words, they could be okay to having workers from China come over. And 3, of course, is they're looking, like I said, to diversify to manufacturing, etc. And then if you look at China, is the opposite in many ways, right? Like China doesn't have really cheap energy. I mean, it's coal, but it doesn't have fantastically cheap energy the way it could be. 2 is because of all these tariffs. So now the incentive to build out factories in the Middle East or wherever else where there's a very low tariff structure. And 3 is they have a population that's willing to become, factory managers or build. They're saying this could be a very powerful marriage.
I think it's also a timing aspect now because of all the things that China has been going through recently as well, right? Like a lot of tech talents. We really see some of these Chinese Chinese companies as well, and people starting to move into like the Gulf. I think a lot of the collaborations that have been announced so far is mostly be on a G2G level. And you think of both of them also geopolitically authoritarian nations. Yeah, and the energy aspect, as you mentioned as well, I think it makes a lot of sense and it works well for both of them.
Yeah.
So, it's going to be quite interesting to see. And actually, I've even been told, like, even culturally, there's a lot more similarities than people think. I was also surprised myself. So I worked briefly at an Arab company. It was a media company. I was there for a couple of months, and I had a friend who is a mainland Chinese guy who lived in Singapore for a number of years. And he happened to be visiting, and then we were just exchanging notes about like Chinese culture and Singapore culture and Middle East culture, and him being a mainland Chinese who has spent time in Singapore, it's like he thinks as a mainlander, like actually Chinese and Arab culture, especially in a corporate setting, is quite similar. There's a very strong sense of hierarchy. I mean, not that Singapore doesn't have a strong sense of hierarchy, but we do. But in Singapore corporates, you do see that the middle management is actually a lot stronger. They're actually bringing a lot of skilled talent in the middle, so the middle managers are able to kind of equip like the bottom. But in Arab companies and just to say, this is all just, I know it's slightly stereotypical, I'm sure there are outliers, but this is just based on cultural observations. A lot of it comes to the apex.
Yeah.
So the guy on top is the guy who makes the final decision on everything. So you do tend to experience a lot more changes. Like if the guy on top decides tomorrow, I don't like this department, it's just cut. Tomorrow, everything gone. A whole bunch of people will lose their jobs, So there's a lot of, so if the guy shifts here, then everyone at the bottom will like move accordingly. So that's apparently how Chinese companies operate, according to him.
Yeah, I mean, I did do some, basic job experience in Beijing. I got to see some of that as well. And that was also like a startup. It was also quite modern in its own way, but you got to see other companies also in play back in the 2008 to 12 era. I think things have obviously changed since then. I think for me, my perspective is I think Singapore is very influenced by MNC, multinational corporations, which tend to be much more of the European and the American style companies, right? So the whole idea of like promotion cycles, like performance improvement plans is very Americanized fundamentally. And also, if you actually look at the talent pool in Singapore, some people study in the US or the UK. So there's a very strong piece of like meritocracy. I wouldn't say it's like the American like individualism, whistleblower kind of dynamic. I think that's exaggerating it, but I think there's these like professional norms that have been calculated because they go like finance team, like everybody's a former ex-KPMG or big four auditor.
Institutionalization.
Yeah, there's a professional dynamic that is quite westernized, I would say. But of course, I think the fact is also, I think these Chinese MNCs are starting to emerge and they're becoming more multinational. I mean, actually, I remember when ByteDance first came to Singapore, a lot of people were very worried about joining it because they felt like maybe too Chinese, because they heard a lot of bad things about 996, all this other stuff. But now that they've been here for a couple of years, actually I know a few people who are like quite happy with the job, which is, I think they have to be bilingual. So they have to be good at English and Chinese to really be able to code switch and be able to present at all levels of management. But I would say like a lot of people are like kind of like they look at it as just like it's a job that has, I think, like one level growth, intellectual challenges, and can work for the right type of person. And to some extent, actually, what I also kind of noticed is like the kind of people who like a US MNC are a bit different from the people who are comfortable with the I think fluency, even cultural affinity is definitely a big chunk. I mean, like if you're not fluent in Mandarin at all, because you never grow with it, I mean, you're probably, it's going to be hard for you. But I've seen a lot of people who, they're a little bit more Chinese. Then they're like kind of like feeling quite comfortable in the Chinese environment. I don't know how to explain it. Maybe it's like, in Singapore, there's all these schools, right? It's like Anglo-Chinese school, Raffles Institution, Chinese school, right? And so you have your Raffles boys and your ACS boys who are very much more like Anglophile, right? In that sense. I mean, whereas your Hwa Chong people tend to be much more China or Chinese culture or affinity. So to some extent, I think there's that separation where, a lot of people who are comfortable with Chinese culture are working with the Chinese companies, right? And so they would not necessarily have been, I don't know, maybe the better position for promotion or success because they're comfortable in that culture. And then you look at, Shou Zhiqiu, right? I mean, he's CEO for TikTok. He's quite comfortable, clearly, in both domains, both representing the American side, but also working with, the entire workforce. So I think it's somehow really good at, I don't know what's the word. I mean, it's like Lee Kuan Yew's hero. It's like, someone who can finally speak good English and speak good mother tongue, right? It's like, what is Singapore good at? Code switching. On that note, let's wrap things up and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. We would also appreciate you leaving a rating or review. Head over to www.bravesea.com for member content, resources, and community. Stay well and stay brave.